Good evening, good evening. We are moving on to Tanya. Sometimes when you're studying Tanya, and Tanya is as much as it is an inspirational book, it's also a very intellectual book. It's a very methodical book, unbelievably methodical. It's very deep and very rich, and it really takes you there one step at a time. And I can promise you that every additional chapter that you'll learn, when you'll read what it says in the previous chapters, you'll all of a sudden say, now I really understand it. When you learn chapter one, you can't really understand chapter one. The more you learn later, the earlier, the better all the concepts start becoming more clear. You understand where we're going. So the point is, it's a very intellectual book. It's a very methodical book, but we have to make sure to never miss the forest for the trees, which means we always have to be seeing the practical motivation, the practical inspiration, the beauty in every idea. And even if there's a profundity that's beyond us, we have to always make sure that we're staying true to what's the Tanya telling me? How could I live with this message? How could this message impact my life? So without further ado, dear friends, let us start doing a little bit of reading. And I want to first do a little bit, I want to bring you into chapter 4. 2 weeks ago. Last week was Rosh Hashanah. Last class, 2 weeks ago, I did an overview, a basic overview of the entire Tanya. And if you weren't there then, the recording is up online. And I've gotten wonderful feedback from that, so I'm happy we did it. Maybe every few chapters we'll be doing a recap to get us all back in the flow, make sure that we're not getting lost. But I want to discuss a little bit more chapter 4 before we conclude the chapter. It's a beautiful, beautiful ending today. This is what chapter 4 said. So in these chapters of Tanya, we are focused on the godly soul. We all have two souls, a godly soul and an animal soul. Right now in Tanya, we are still talking about the godly soul. The animal soul does not make an appearance again until chapter 6. We had a brief introduction to the animal soul in chapter 1, but right now we are focusing on getting to learn the anatomy and the structure and the internal system of the godly soul. And what the author of it tells us is like this: the soul has an inner dimension and it has an outer dimension, an inner world and an outer world, insides and outsides. The insides of the soul is its intellect and its emotion, the way it thinks, the way it processes information, and the way it feels. That's insides. And then there's outsides. Outsides are behaviors. And there are 3 forms of behaviors. There is thought, speech, and action. All 3 of those are behaviors. They're not who you are. They are behaviors that you choose to do, and they're behaviors that you take upon yourself. So we choose to do things. You have all made a choice to clear your schedule and to sit here and study Tanya for an hour. God bless you all. That's wonderful. You can make a choice to say something. You can make a choice to think about something. Thought, active thought, is a choice. Which means if you're going to allow something to have free rent in your mind, right? Like, how does the line go? You being upset at somebody else is letting him live in your mind rent free. You ever heard that one? So we have a mind. And if you choose, whatever you choose to think about, that is a behavior. That's an action. And that is the outer world of the soul. The soul has the capabilities of an inner world. It can produce intellect. It can produce emotions. And then the soul has an outer world. It is capable of producing behaviors, which means that this soul is going to do something right now. I'm going to think about something. I'm going to speak about something or speak something, and I'm going to do something. And that allows the soul's inner world to spill out into the world of behaviors. Right? When we do something, we're not robots. When we do something, we usually do it with at least some form of motivation. That motivation could either be a cognitive motivation. Something makes sense to me, so I'm going to go do it. Right? Or it could be an emotional motivation. I'm emotionally motivated. I'm going to go do something. So we have that. This is a very important principle to understand. It's a little bit technical. There's an inner world, there's an outer world. Now, the outer world is called garments. They're the garments of the soul. Think about it like a body. We have a body, we have skin, and our body, we can't change our body, right? You could, but you got to go under the, under a knife. You got to go under the light. Got to go on the operating table. But generally speaking, your body it's who you are. You can't change it. You don't change it. Your outer world, your clothing, it's you, something you wear, it's something you assume, but it's not you. You could take it off, you could change it. So the same thing is about the soul. The way the soul thinks and the way the soul feels, that's built in. You can't change it. But the behaviors, that's already something more peripheral. And therefore, the Tanya, in the language of Kabbalah, the world of behaviors, thought, speech, and action are called garments of the soul, right? Figuratively called garments of the soul. Okay. This chapter, chapter 4, essentially says only two things. And I want to capture it for you. This chapter says, what are the purpose of the garments of the soul? What good does it provide to our soul that it has the capability to do behaviors? What do our behaviors do for our soul? And this chapter says there are two functions, two gifts that the garments give to the soul. Number one is expression. Number two is connection. Expression, connection. Let me explain that to you. The first one is very simple, expression. The garments, the behaviors of the soul, allow the soul not just to have emotions and a thought process, a worldview, right? Like a philosophy, like a way it sees life. The garments give the soul the opportunity to express that. So imagine if you love. Imagine you love. When you love, you want to express it, right? We don't like bottling things up. We are humans. We feel something, we want to express it. If I love somebody, I want to spend time with them. I want to give them a hug. I want to hang out with them. If something hurt me, I'm going to want to express it. I'm going to want to talk about it with somebody. So very simply, we have a godly soul. The godly soul, its worldview is its relationship with God. God is a greater reality, is more real than the world. And therefore, it wants to act upon that. It wants to express that. So the garments, thought, speech, and action, give the soul the opportunity to express it. How does our soul express its connection with God? The mitzvahs, Torah and mitzvahs. Every time we study Torah, every time we do a mitzvah, we are giving our soul expression. Our soul is in a relationship with God, and it loves the opportunity to express what's happening inside. We all understand. It's a very beautiful thing, right? Whenever there's somebody who doesn't have the opportunity to express themselves, it's very painful, right? So the garments give the soul the gift of expression. That's number one, which is very simple. The outer world expresses the soul's inner world. Point number two is where the Tanya shares with us something tremendously profound. The Tanya says that the garments also give the soul the gift of connection to God. And we spoke about this in length in the previous class where we spoke about this. But briefly, the Tanya goes on to explain to us how the whole concept of a connection with God really is essentially a fallacy. It's a logical impossibility. For a human being to connect to God makes no sense, logically speaking. We are very finite human beings, finite beings. God is infinite. the laws of science say that something finite and something infinite have nothing in common. That's the way it works. I explained this concept more in length in the previous class, but I gave you the analogy, if you remember, of who could we humans make a relationship with. So we can make relationships with fellow human beings. We can make relationships with animals. We could. But could you make a relationship with an ant? Could you make a relationship with a fruit fly? Right? You know what I'm talking about? You guys got fruit flies sometimes in your house, right? The challenge is real. You can't. Why not? Because, the gap between your two experiences are too large. This is a gap that's too large to bridge. So relationships need to be built upon a lot of common ground, and beyond common ground, relationships are built on commonality. Commonality. What do we have in common? What could I do for you and what could you do for me? The more commonality, the more we could connect. When it comes to an ant, I'm sorry, we ran out of any commonality, even though we have a lot in common with ants. We both inhabit the same earth. We both don't fly, right? Most ants don't fly. We both have feet. We both have needs. We both procreate. I don't know. We both have eyes. We're actually pretty much in common, but no, not enough to really form a relationship, which means you're simply on the wrong frequency, right? It's not that your relationship can't get deep. It doesn't even begin. It doesn't even register, right? There's no relationship here. If you can't even make a relationship with an ant, is it logical to assume that a human can make a relationship with God? No. What do we have in common? What commonality is there? What space could we take up in God's world? So the Alter Rebbe says we have to understand that a relationship with God is an impossibility. In the words of the Zohar, right, the primary work of Kabbalah, no mind can grasp God. No mind can grasp God. So the Alter Rebbe says, really, and it's funny to explain why we can't have a relationship with God, but we have to appreciate it. We have to appreciate that a relationship with God, don't take it for granted. Don't take it as a given. A relationship with God is not a given. We, using our own human tools, on our own human terms, have no access to God. The only way we could have a relationship with God is through Torah and mitzvahs. And the Alter Rebbe explains, and the Alter Rebbe brings us down from Kabbalah, from the Zohar, that the commandments, when God told us to do a mitzvah is not just a commandment where God says, okay, go do this, like busy work, right? Okay, go do this, and then go do that. It's much deeper. A mitzvah is where God literally compacted himself. God literally placed himself into a mitzvah. And God placed himself into every word of Torah. So that when you do a mitzvah, you literally come up and close to God in the most infinite and the most up and close personal way possible. So a mitzvah is not just a commandment from God. A mitzvah is the gift that God gave us of a way to find God. How does our soul connect with God? Not through its mind, not through its heart, but literally just through the mitzvah it does. Every mitzvah gives us the gift of connection. And again, this is not something which really is like you can't, it's a very powerful concept. An infinite God compacted himself into every mitzvah, that when you put on tefillin, you are literally in the presence of God and you are one with God. And to use a terminology that we're going to read in a moment, it's us hugging God and God hugging us, right? What's a hug? A hug means that you're right up and personal, right? You could speak with somebody on FaceTime, right? You could send emojis, you could send voice notes. You can't give a hug unless you're right up and close and personal. And that's why our sages use the terminology of a hug, which is like, is a very endearing term. God hugs us, we hug God when we do a mitzvah. And therefore, when the soul has behaviors, the garments, when our soul has the opportunity to do a mitzvah, our soul could sit in a sukkah, right? We have sukkahs coming up, could shake the lulav, could put on tefillin, could put a mezuzah on the door, and light Shabbos candles. We're not just doing Jewish ritual. Our soul is connecting and bonding with God in the most powerful way possible in the entire universe. And I don't just mean our physical universe. I mean, including within the realm of angels and souls, whatever's going on up there. Nothing compares to the experience of doing a mitzvah. And with that, so that's the entire chapter. The behaviors of the soul give it the gift of expression and the gift of connection to God. I want to begin reading on the bottom of page 54. I sent out the PDF. And by the way, I'm going to be sending out tomorrow, God willing. I'll be sending out a PDF that has all the texts, all the handouts. I'll send to you in one file. It's like that. You have it organized. You could save it on your phone or your computer for reference, because we sent out till now 6 different handouts. So if you have one handout with everything, and I actually would encourage you, we have 2-week break now. I'd encourage you to print it out and just spend time reading through from chapter 1 through chapter 4. And it will be very, very helpful. You don't have to learn it too in depth. Just read it. It won't take you more than 20, 30 minutes at most. If you read the words, give yourself a refresher, see the words again in Tanya, you'll feel a lot more empowered to keep on going into chapter 5. So, bottom of page 54, second to last paragraph. Thus, the Torah and its mitzvos provide garments and expression for the entire soul. For all 10 soul powers and all the soul's 613 subcomponents from head to foot. Every mitzvah gives a different part of the soul expression. And consequently, part 2, your soul literally touches the infinite. Not only can your soul express itself, it touches the infinite. It literally becomes completely bound in the bundle of life with God. And the light of God literally engulfs your soul, dressing her from head to foot. Page 55, as the verse states, he is my rock in whom I take refuge. And it is written, as with a shield, the will of God surrounds him, referring to God's will and wisdom that is manifest in his Torah and its mitzvahs. So we have here an unbelievable concept. Judaism is not just rituals. Judaism, the rituals of Yiddishkeit, right? The real term for Judaism is Yiddishkeit. What we do as a Jew, the mitzvahs that we do. These are not just things that we are commanded to do, so we do it. They're not just traditions, they're not just rituals. They're literally the very way we as a Jew connect with God. How you doing, Stuart? Good evening. Welcome on board. And this is really the reason why. I've told this to you previously as well. There's something very magical when a mitzvah, when a Jew does a mitzvah. Even if they don't understand what they're doing, but a mitzvah has very long-term consequences. And I just tell you as a shliach, as a Chabad shliach, this is a cornerstone of the Rebbe's training, of the Rebbe's teachings. You got to trust the system. A Jew and a mitzvah is very deep. A Jewish soul is coming in touch with God. It's magical. Things happen. It's beyond what we know. Let's continue reading, part 3. And the Alter Rebbe now concludes the chapter with 2 beautiful insights. A new appreciation for life. All right, part 3 of the chapter. Before we read, I want to ask you a question. We all live in the physical world that we all know of, right? Our soul inhabits a body. So we're very well aware of the world that we live in. We also know that in Judaism, there's something called the world to come, heaven, paradise, the afterlife, whatever you want to call it. Our souls as well came from that place, right? So our souls came from heaven. Our souls, God willing, after a long, healthy, fruitful life, we will go back to heaven. So there's really two worlds of the soul. There's the present world, and then there's the world to come. You tell me, what do you think? Which world is better? Which world is a better experience for the soul? What's a more beautiful place? Is it our world or heaven, the world to come? What do you say? What does conventional wisdom say? What does Jewish wisdom say? Or let me back up. What do most religions say? What do most religions say? What's the goal? Is the goal the here or is the goal the there?
I think most religions say it's the there, but that in terms of which world is better for the soul, I think it's the present world.
The last thing you said, I just want to make sure I heard it properly, in terms of benefit for the soul?
Yeah, for which one is better.
So better for the soul is here, but maybe more blissful is maybe there. All right, Gail said heaven. Anybody else?
I agree. It might be wrong, but I also agree it's here, if I'm right, because only here I have the expressions, the garments. And what do I do with my soul? I mean, you tell me, but what do I do with my soul in heaven? Can I express myself there too, or no?
Oh, so Elke is already following the logic here, right? Right? If this is where we could do a mitzvah, then 1 second. And if a mitzvah is so powerful, so you're getting there, Elke. Judaism is very unique. As far as I know, we are the only religion that places more emphasis, more preciousness to this world than the world to come. All other religions, what's the goal of life? To get there, to go to heaven, stay out of hell. Every religion. So I once heard a cute line that all religions are essentially making suicide bombers. Not all, I mean, either literally or figuratively. But if your whole religion is all about trying to get there, then it's all just a matter of how radical you are. If you don't want to get there now, that means that you're not indoctrinated enough. But essentially, you should want to be a suicide bomber. Okay, it's right. It's a joke. It's a little bit of a stretch, but there's a truth to the idea. Most religions are saying the goal's not here; the goal is there. And even from a Jewish perspective, which means just think about it a little bit. Where does our soul feel more comfortable? In this world or in the world to come? Conventional wisdom says the soul is at home, is having more pleasure, is simply enjoying life better up there than here. This world is not a very conducive environment for a soul. There's a lot of garbage in this world. There's so many distractions in this world. And we all have a beautiful, spiritual, holy soul, and it has to live in this world. So, there's no question about it. Our soul has a difficult time in this environment, in our world. It's a very alien environment. A spiritual soul in a physical world is a very difficult place to be. But Judaism comes along. Doug, go ahead, Doug.
I'm listening to all this, and it sounds really, interesting, because everybody has to ask themselves, what is our purpose here on earth then? Yes, our soul wants to go to heaven. We want to be a good person. So it's got to be more than just doing mitzvot on earth. It's doing, in other words, the purpose, my purpose here is just, I've always been taught that you be a good person. You do things for other people when they're in need. These are all mitzvot that we want to do. So, as we're taught, if you're really a good person, then there's a great chance you're going to be elevated, higher to the afterlife. Okay? Right,
but okay, so you see, the moment that you say do good here, so like that, you'll get a good afterlife. You're already taking away the focus from this world. Is that what I'm saying?
Yeah, but I understand. But what I'm
I
saying,
know, I'm just I'm focusing on the last thing you just said. I know that, but
I get what you're saying. But what I'm saying is, there's so many bad people in this world we live in. There's so many bad things going on, and it makes everybody wonder, why is all this happening? It's just,
okay.
it seems like we're living in a very difficult time. Not that it hasn't happened before in history. There's been many bad times in history, but I think that the thought process is, what everybody has to ask themselves: what is their purpose on this earth?
Right. So let's get there. Let's get there, Doug. Judaism says, let's read right now. There's a statement from the sages in the Ethics of Our Fathers, which is actually quite a radical statement, and even the great commentators of the Mishnah struggle to really explain the logic of the statement. Let's read. Page 55. This explains the teaching of the Mishnah. The Mishnah says, Ethics of Our Fathers, 1 hour of repentance and good deeds in this world is better than all the life of the world to come. What's better? 1 hour of the life of a Jew. You could be a Jew. You could do a mitzvah for 1 hour. That's better. And the words of the sages is yafet, more beautiful. 1 hour of mitzvahs is better and more beautiful than all the life of the world to come. It's quite a shocking statement. What could be the logic of such a statement, of such an assertion? All the life of the world to come, where there's beauty and serenity and spirituality and only goodness and no corruption. And 1 hour of life in this world where we could do a mitzvah is better than all that? Just think about, just put it on these terms. Where does a soul have more of a spiritual experience? 1 hour here or 1 hour there? 1 hour there has to be a more spiritual experience. How great are the spiritual experiences of this world? It's limited. So what is it? How can we understand this? But based on what we said, we could explain it. Let's continue reading. Because in the world to come, the Talmud describes it as we enjoy the radiance of the divine presence. That's what's happening in the world to come. You're simply experiencing the pleasure of being in the divine presence, which refers to the pleasure of understanding God. There's a certain awareness and understanding of God, and it's literally pleasurable. All right. I don't remember being to heaven, so I don't truly understand and relate to this. No, but it's being in the environment of the ultimate reality, being in the environment of the ultimate truth. That's what souls experience in heaven. The bliss of basking in ultimate truth, in the ultimate light of the real truth of reality. That's pleasurable. Okay, but here the author says, but let's think back to the logic. It is impossible for any created entity, even a very lofty one, such as angels or souls, to grasp more than a glimmer of divine light. Using a creation, even if it's a spiritual creation like an angel or soul, how up and close could it get to God? Not much, just a glimmer. Let's continue. For this reason, the Talmud refers to the experience of the next world specifically as basking in the mere radiance of the divine presence and not the divine presence itself. So in the world to come, it's very pleasurable, it's very blissful, it's very spiritual. But in terms of a connection, of a relationship with God, it's very minimal. Why? Because it's a creation trying to reach God on its own, which is inherently quite limited. But with regard to God himself in his glory, we are taught no thought can grasp him at all, except when you grasp him and are dressed in the Torah and its mitzvahs, which can only be performed in this physical world. Only then you literally grasp and are dressed in God, since the Torah and God are totally one. So this is the dichotomy, what's happening over here. Here in this world is the ultimate experience. Where does a Jewish soul get to bond with God? Literally bond with God. That only happens when you do a mitzvah. Where could you do a mitzvah? Only in this physical world. Because there are no palm branches to make a lulav out of in heaven. That's why. And there's no cows to make hide, to take its hide and make tefillin in. You can only do that here in this world. So if you want to talk about the quality of what's happening, this world is infinitely more powerful than any spiritual experience a soul or an angel has in the higher worlds. The only catch is that because we live in physical bodies and our five senses are quite limited we only receive really physical inputs and physical stimuli. So when we're having such an intense relationship with God, our physical senses don't really feel it. So we don't get to feel the power of the moment when we do a mitzvah, but we have to know what's happening. When you do a mitzvah, you're bonding with God in the most infinite way possible, in the most intimate way possible. Souls in heaven, it's the flip side. They get to experience, they get to feel what they're experiencing. They feel the pleasure, but the quality of the experience is quite weak. So here in this world, you don't get the pleasure of it, but this is the real deal. In the upper world, very limited experience, but at least you get to feel it. That's the drawback. If we would truly understand what it would mean to do a mitzvah, we would be addicted to it. We wouldn't be able to, we would jump with joy of just being a Jew. I could do a mitzvah. But it's kind of by design that this world is a place where we have to find God and we have to put in the effort on our own. But we have to know this is really where it's at. You know, there's a nice little Hasidic parable, right? Which is just an illustration. The story goes, there's once a soul that was on his way descending into earth, about to be born, a brand new soul, beginning its journey here on earth. And then there's another soul, which is outgoing, which is going back to heaven, going up. So the descending soul, which is so excited, right, about to start its journey in the physical life in a body, he stops the soul coming up and says, you know, I heard that in the world that I'm going to and that you're coming from, for a few ruble, you could buy a talus and you could connect with, is it true? Just with a few ruble, you could buy a talus? And the outgoing soul, right, the ascending soul says, he makes a deep sigh. And he says, it's true. But until you earn those few rubles, which means, you come down all excited and all idealistic, and all of a sudden you have to start making money and you lose focus. And in the world to come, you get to appreciate, you have the pleasure, but you don't have the real experience. Here in this world, the sense of the pleasure of connection with God is inhibited, but this is really where it's at, which is why every soul in heaven, as pleasurable as it is deeply, it misses the opportunity to be here in this world. And it's in Jewish law. According to Jewish law, one should not walk around the cemetery with a mitzvah. It's a very interesting law. For example, if you're wearing tzitzit, like, I wear tzitzit 24/7, right? If you go to a cemetery, you're supposed to tuck it in. Don't hurt the deceased. Don't rub it in. They're pained enough that they can't wear tzitzis. Here in the cemetery, tuck it in. You shouldn't walk around a cemetery with tefillin. Again, it's you have the experience, they don't. Where is it at? It's right here. It's an unbelievable thing. And talk about the Alter Rebbe. the Alter Rebbe was a very, very passionate person. He was a genius of a man, but sometimes geniuses become very cold people. They lack emotion. They become very detached from reality and like a little bit cold. And the Alter Rebbe was a genius, was a giant, but he was also a very deeply emotional person. And you know, in fact, in the Schneerson family, in the Alter Rebbe's family, they knew that the Alter Rebbe had a health condition. His health condition was that he would literally, I don't know what it's called, but out of the nostrils of his nose, I apologize if it sounds a little bit gross, like pieces of flesh would sometimes come out from his nose. It was a very painful experience, and he had to be treated for it. The doctors said that this is actually a physical ailment that comes from a psychological cause. It's when somebody is yearning for something so much that it literally physiologically affects them, and this is one of the symptoms. Such yearning. And the Alter Rebbe yearned for connection with God. And the Alter Rebbe would always say, he had like a quotable quote, and he would always say this when he was very emotionally moved and emotionally stirred. He would like speak to God. He would say, God, I don't want your Olam Haba. I don't want your world to come. I don't want your Gan Eden. I don't want your paradise. I don't want your angels. I just want you. I just want you. Don't give me experiences. I just want you. I think that's the message here. In the world to come, you've got paradise, you've got spirituality. It's wonderful. It's beautiful. But where could I find just you, just God? Where could a Jew find God? It's in studying Torah, and it's in doing a mitzvah. When I was a young yeshiva boy, I'll just tell you, we would go on, here in Michigan, they're called the Friday Boys. We would just simply go out and find Jews, and men and women, and the men would encourage them to put on tefillin. And would share Torah thought. Then it was a wonderful experience, and of course I still do it now as my day job. And then it was just a little side gig as a yeshiva bacher. Would go out on Friday afternoons. And here in Michigan, I had a route. There's actually Greenfield, a 9 mile. There's a hospital there. There's a few, and there's quite I don't think anymore, but there were a lot of Jews working there. And we had like a regular weekly route, and we would go, and we had about 7, 8, 9 men that every week would put on tefillin. But part of the work is that a lot of Jews did not want to put on tefillin, right? And there's resistance to it. Like, what are these kids walking around? I'm busy, I'm making money. You're walking around, tell me to do it. So a lot of people did not like it and were turned off, and either politely or not so politely said no. And it's actually very good training as a young boy to learn the art of persistence, and to learn the art of having a thick skin, and to never stop asking. And there was a teaching I once saw from the previous Lubavitcher Rebbe, Rabbi Yosef Yitzchak Schneerson, who was the father-in-law of the Rebbe. And he once said something which is so beautiful, and as a young yeshiva boy, it gave me a lot of encouragement. He said, when you help a Jew do a mitzvah, to put on tefillin, they're going to be deeply grateful and indebted to you. They're going to feel so thankful to you. If not today, then tomorrow. If not tomorrow, then next year. If not next year, then in the next life, right? Which means in the afterlife. A mitzvah is a precious opportunity. It's not just a ritual. It's not just a commandment. It's not just a tradition. It's the most powerful experience that the soul could ever experience, and it's the most powerful experience in all of creation, because it's the only opportunity a creation has the opportunity to directly bond with the Creator. Okay, let's conclude the chapter. Okay, it's so powerful, so inspiring. The Alter Rebbe tells us about the power of a mitzvah. It's really amazing. Wow. A mitzvah is such a beautiful opportunity, but then you open up your eyes it doesn't look that way. It doesn't feel that way. Sukkot is coming, so you'll pick up a lulav and an etrog. When you shake the lulav and etrog and make the blessing over it, you are literally bonding with God. But what is this? A palm branch, a willow branch, a myrtle branch, an etrog, some citrus fruit from who knows where, from some godforsaken part of. This is my connection with God. You sit in a sukkah. Well, you've got 4 walls. You got some wooden beams and some organic material on top of you. Like, what's going on over here? This is the big experience. I'm connecting with God in the most infinite way. What is this? What's tefillin? It's just a cow's hide painted black, pressed into a box. Like, is this really where it's at? And sometimes, especially, in the modern era, we struggle with this. Spirituality is much more popular than ritualistic stuff, right? People like a spiritual experience. Putting on tefillin, that's not a very big turn on for people, right? Like, today there's the line, I'm spiritual, not religious. I understand it. I understand. Spirituality feels a lot more wholesome and holistic, and to be real, it feels a lot more productive than just busy work. Do this and do that, and this mitzvah and that mitzvah. So why is there this disconnect? It's the most powerful experience, but it's just so physical. It's the Alter Rebbe addresses this. Page 56, right, where it says a royal embrace. Now, the Alter Rebbe says, while it is true, right, it's true, that the Torah is manifest in the mundane, physical things through which the mitzvahs are observed, not through spiritual experiences. And one does not generally sense a palpable bond with the divine with these rituals, right? It's just physical stuff. But the Alter Rebbe says, yet, even so, this does not compromise the effects of the mitzvahs. And the Alter Rebbe is going to give us an interesting analogy. I want to ask you a little question. Imagine, let's give a little analogy. When you give a hug to your child? You hug your child. When is the hug more meaningful? In the winter or in the summer? Gil, you're looking at me as if I'm crazy, right? Well, whoever thinks that way. Or, imagine those moments in life where you really needed a hug. Or somebody gave you a hug and it really meant a lot. It was really appreciated. Maybe your day was down and, the right person at the right time gave you a hug. Is there a difference if it was in the winter or in the summer? No.
Less clothes probably in the summer.
Oh, so what's very good, Alex. That's the logic of my question. In the winter, generally, people have more layers of clothing. Like maybe they'll also have a sweater on, and their shirt will be thicker and long sleeve. And in the summer, when you hug somebody or somebody hugs you, there's less clothing. So is the winter hugs where there's more clothing, does that compromise the quality of the hug, the meaningfulness of the hug, the bond? What was that?
Not as far as I'm concerned. I mean, it doesn't matter how many clothes you have on. It matters, how much you hug someone or how hard or what you say maybe at the same time, or, just, I don't think it matters if it's summer, winter, spring, fall, whatever. It's the time for that person that needs that hug.
Right, which means, when somebody gives you a hug, there's the person inside. It doesn't make a difference if it's one layer of clothing or 3 layers of clothing. The bond, every hug is a bond. The bond, the meaningfulness of this hug, it's not, the clothing is not even relevant here. The point is what's really happening. So the Alter Rebbe says, don't get distracted by the clothing. God, in order to make himself available for a hug, dressed himself in physical stuff. The physical stuff is just a garment. But when you do a mitzvah, the Alter Rebbe says you are literally hugging God and God is hugging you. You are expressing your love for God and God is reaching out to you as well and giving you a connection. Expression, connection. You hug God, God is hugging you. Okay, it happens to be that the way God made himself available, the garments that God is appearing himself to you right now is physical. So what? So what? It doesn't compromise what's really happening here. That's what the Alter Rebbe says. Let's read. We can compare this to the experience of hugging a human king. There's no difference in the closeness and bonding with the king, whether you hug him while he is wearing one robe or several robes, since the king himself is inside them. The king is there. Who cares what he's wearing? How thick the layers of... You have the chance to hug the king. And the same is true if the king initiates the embrace, offering a hug with his arm. Even though his arm is garbed in his robes, it does not affect the quality of the connection. So the Alter Rebbe says the same is true with our embrace with God through studying and observing the Torah and its mitzvahs. As the verse states, and his right hand embraces me, referring to the Torah which was given by God's right hand. When we study Torah, when we do a mitzvah, this is God extending his arm out to give us a hug. And when we step into that space to accept the hug, we study the Torah, we do the mitzvah, then we get a hug from God. Okay, it's in the form of physical activity. Who cares? The point is that God is here. And let's conclude, God's right hand is symbolic of benevolence and water. As we've learned earlier in the chapter, water is the code word for Torah. So Torah is an act of kindness from God, where God gave us the opportunity, the benevolent opportunity, to access God himself. And that's the chapter. That's the chapter. You know, I'm reminded of a little story, and then we'll conclude. In the history of Chabad's work of doing outreach didn't begin when we came to America. We were also doing it in Europe, in the old world, including in the times when it was very difficult to do it, in the times of communist Russia. And in the history of Chabad, there are, it's a badge of honor to say that your grandfather or your great-grandfather sat in the Russian prisons or was arrested. Right? We all have a criminal record in our family because Chabad Hasidim did the work to spread Judaism, and were generally caught and were arrested and sent to decades of hard work in the gulags in Siberia, and too often, even worse, they paid the ultimate price. I was just speaking with Mushki's grandfather. He's 89 years old, and he grew up in Russia, which is now Ukraine, in Kharkiv, Ukraine, which was then part of the former Soviet Union. He told me his father was never home at night, never home at night. Why? Because all the KGB raids, or then it was called the NKVD, all the NKVD raids happened at night. And he knew that he's on their wanted list. He was just never home at night. So they would come to raid the home to arrest him, and he was never there. He said, my father slept in trains and in train stations. He would go to remote train stations and sleep there for the night. He would sometimes during the day step in and out of the house, never at night, because he was doing the work of spreading Judaism, and he was part of the underground system of the Cheder, educating Jewish children. But he was eventually caught. Don't worry, he was eventually caught, and he got married in Siberia. His wedding ring was a silver spoon that he bent into a ring. these women, he says, this is self-sacrifice. So anyways, so there was one chassid, his name was Rabbi Shlomo Chaim Kesselman. He actually, there's maybe some of you know, he has some grandchildren here in Detroit, the Kesselman family. So Rabbi Shlomo Chaim Kesselman was a teacher in the yeshiva, and he was caught teaching Judaism to teenage yeshiva boys. And he sat for many years in prison. And his wife and his children eventually escaped out of Russia, out of the former Soviet Union. But he was stuck. He was stuck in Siberia. And his wife, they were able to send letters occasionally, right? Of course, everything was censored, and the officers would first look through everything, but he would get updates. And his wife would send him pictures of the family, of his children, who he wasn't even able to see in years, right? Young children. And he had twin boys, and the twin boys turned 3 years old, so they had an upshernish, which is the traditional cutting of the hair for the first time. And his wife, Rabbi Kesselman's wife, sent him a few strands of both boys' hair in the mail. So then in Siberia, he should have a little bit, a little piece of his own child who he couldn't see. And years later, he was finally released, and he came to his wife. He eventually moved to Israel after that, once he left Russia. He told his wife, you sent me pictures, and I was able to see the children, but nothing was more precious to me than those few strands of hair. That was my most prized possession, which is interesting, because that was his own child, right? This was a piece of his own child. And maybe that's a little bit of an analogy of what's happening over here, In the world to come, you get the pleasure of experiencing God, the radiance of God, but it's from a distance. Where do you actually get up and close to God, right? To literally give a hug to God, a piece of God, right? That only happens in this world when we do a mitzvah. That's chapter 4, dear friends. And with that, we conclude for tonight. And of course, let's keep on talking. If you have any questions, if you have any thoughts, and I've got nowhere to go tonight. And I want to wish you all a wonderful evening. And Yom Kippur is coming tomorrow night. So I want to wish you all a very special Yom Kippur and a wonderful continuation of the holidays, Yom Kippur and Sukkot. And I look forward to seeing all of you very soon. And hopefully we'll be in touch between now and the next class in 3 weeks. I want to wish you all a wonderful night. And a good Yom Tov.
Rabbi, thank
Thank you.